Thanks. You can be singing, man. That was great, great, great singing. I love it when I can start a sermon with a cat story. And some of you may not know, I'm not the world's biggest fan of cats. And that's understandable. For those of you that love cats, my sentiment is you can have them all. And I won't bother you. That'll be just great. But I heard about this man and his wife. They owned a cat. Really, the wife loved his cat, but the man, he didn't like the cat. And the cat he was sick of this cat. The cat was always climbing on stuff and tearing stuff up, and he was just tired of this cat. So one day, he decided he'd had enough of this cat, so he was going to do something about it. So he took the cat and he put it in a burlap bag and tied it up. And then he took it down the river and put a bunch of rocks in the bag and threw that cat-filled, rock-filled bag over in the water and drowned the cat. Now, kids, do not try this at home, okay? I'm not saying you ought to do that, okay? Although I didn't cry when I heard the story. But anyway, so the wife came home and the cat was gone. And it just broke her heart. She just cried. She didn't know what's that, but the cat didn't show up. And the husband, trying to be the ever so good husband, said, honey, I'm so sorry. I know you love that cat. I miss that cat too. And so after a while, the husband decided he would run an ad in the local newspaper. And anybody that would find that cat, he would give them a $50 reward for finding that cat. And obviously, nobody found the cat. Nobody turned the cat in. So after a couple of weeks, she was still grieving. And he said to his wife, said, I tell you what, I'm going to up the reward. I will run another ad in the paper, and I will offer $500 for anybody that can find that cat and bring it home. Well, he had a buddy that knew how he felt about the cat, and that he never liked that cat. And his buddy said to him one of these days, said, now look, I know how you feel about this cat. How in the world are you offering $500 for anybody to find that cat? You ought to be glad that cat's gone. And the husband said this, Bud, when you know what I know, you can afford to be generous. Well, I like that story, and I mentioned that story today because today we're going to talk a little bit about giving, and I know that makes some of you nervous, but don't be nervous. Here's what I would say to you. When it comes to giving money to the Lord, here's what I'd say. I'd say the same thing that man says. When you know what I know, you can afford to be generous. When you've read the Bible and read what the book says about how God works in a person's life who is faithful with their finances, you learn there is no such thing as a risk when it comes to giving to the Lord. Now, if you're new today, if you come regularly, you know we don't talk a lot about money in our church. Matter of fact, we've never even passed an offering plate inside this building. So if you're new today, I don't want you to walk in and say, oh, mercy, they talk about money every week. No, we don't. And I don't want you to think that you came on the wrong Sunday, all right? Because you didn't. Because this is really not a sermon about money, although we will mention it a couple of times. But this is a sermon about our hearts, and we're going to talk about that. If you're a guest, you can learn some spiritual principles today, and you can learn a lot about the inside of this church family. I was encouraged. Y'all know we have an earlier service, and we had a brand new couple here. It's the first time they'd ever been to church here. And they grabbed George after the service today, and they said, we'll be back. If that's the way y'all handle that, we'll be back. So I was encouraged to hear that. We never ask our guests or our visitors to ever give a dime. Today, I want to talk a little bit to our church family. Now, let me tell you who that is. If you consider Crosswater Community Church to be your church, I want to talk to you a little bit today. Whether you have officially joined the church, gone through Membership 101 or not, I want to talk to you if you consider this to be your church. And we're going to learn some great life lessons today. I want to give you a story today that's found in the Old Testament in the book of 2 Chronicles chapter 24. Now, inside your bulletin, you have some study notes. You can pull those out right now. now, and I've actually printed the scripture for you, and the scripture is also going to be up on the screen so that you can see it. Normally, I don't read a lot of scripture at the beginning of the service. I just read it as we go along, as I'm teaching. But today, I want to read a story to you, and I think it's important you see the whole story before we get started. So it'll be on the screen. It's in your bulletin, and follow this cool story. Teenagers, you ought to listen, see about a young guy and what he does for God, all right? 2 Chronicles chapter 24, verses 1 through 14. Here's what it says. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. Whoa, man, when you read that, how many 7-year-olds you know get to be king? Although I've been in some of your houses and the 7-year-old does run your house, I understand. It's happened in my house too, okay? But I'll tell you how this 7-year-old became king in just a minute. And he reigned in Jerusalem 40 years. Now that's a long time. Only Saul, David, and Solomon reigned that long, so this is a big deal that Joash becomes king. By the way, I want everybody to practice saying his name. It's Joash. Everybody say it out loud. Joash. Okay. His mother was Zibiah. Won't make you say that. His mother was Zibiah from Beersheba. I love this verse. Look at verse 2. Joash did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. I don't know what's going to be written on my tombstone, but it wouldn't make me mad if that was written on there, would it you? Jack did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight. Man, how could you sum a guy's life up better? And it says he did what was pleasing in the Lord's sight throughout the lifetime of Jehoiada the priest. Now, this is worth noting because there are 39 kings that Israel will have after the country divides into two countries. And of those 39 kings, only 8 of them are going to be good. So Joash is one of the 8 good guys who served as king. It says in verse 3 that Jehoiada, that's the priest, he chose 2 wives for Joash, and he had sons and daughters. And now verse 4, at one point, Joash decided to repair and restore the temple of the Lord. Now that's an important verse for us. Actually, that's why I'm reading this story to you this morning. There's some work we need to do here at the church, and I want to use what Joash did as an example, and I'll tell you about it in just a few minutes. So when he decided to repair the temple, here's what it says in verse 5. He summoned the priest and the Levites and gave them instructions. He called all the preachers together and said, go to all the towns of Judah and collect the required annual offerings so that we can repair the temple of our God. Do not delay. Okay? But now look what happens. He wanted them to go out among all the people and take up this offering. I would call this Plan A. He said, okay, everybody get together. Y'all go out to everybody's house, take an offering from everybody. But look what it says. But the Levites did not act immediately. These were the preachers that were supposed to go take this offering. So what you have here is some uncooperative ushers, uncooperative offering takers. The king says, y'all go take this offering. They didn't want to do it. Now, you know, a lot of people don't like to ask for money, and I don't like to ask for money, but when it comes to the Lord, when you know what I know, you're not afraid to be generous. So look in verse 6. So the king called for Jehoiada. This is when the priest wouldn't go get the money. He said, Jehoiada the priest, and asked him, why haven't you demanded the Levites to go out and collect the temple taxes from the towns of Judah and from Jerusalem? He called the head preacher in and says, how come you haven't brought your staff in and got on them for not going to take this offering? They know, tell them to get off their duffs and go get this offering. And he said, there's nothing new. Look what he says. Moses, the servant of the Lord, levied his tax on the community of Israel in order to maintain the tabernacle of the covenant. He said, I'm not asking for something new. God, all the way back to Moses, said that we were supposed to give a percentage of what we have to keep the temple and the ministry of the temple going. So look at verse 7. It says, over the years, the followers of wicked Athaliah, remember her, I'm going to come back to her, bad woman. Over the years, the followers of wicked Athaliah had broken into the temple of God. And they had used all the dedicated things from the temple of the Lord to worship the images of Baal. In other words, the church building had gone down, had decayed and been damaged, and people started going in there using the church stuff for bad stuff, okay? So here comes Plan B. The guys wouldn't go take the offering, so he had Plan B. Here's Plan B, verse 8. So the king now ordered a chest to be made. and set outside the gate leading to the temple of the Lord. Then a proclamation was sent throughout Judah and Jerusalem telling the people to bring to the Lord the tax that Moses, a servant of God, had required of the Israelites in the wilderness. This pleased all the leaders and the people, and they gladly brought their money and filled the chest in it. He said, if y'all won't go get it, here's what we do. We'll make a chest, we'll put it in the front door, I'll send a bulletin out to everybody, tell them to bring their money and put it in the chest. Now that's plan B, and that plan worked pretty good. Look at verse 11. Whenever the chest became full, and it got filled all the time, the Levites would carry it to the king's officials. Then the court secretary and an officer of the high priest would come and empty the chest and take it back to the temple again. This went on day after day. Man, isn't this cool? They put the chest out front. People came, put their money in there. They take the money, give it inside, put it back out there. It get filled again. They'd take it in, bring it back, get filled again. They'd take it back. So it says this went on day after day, and a large amount of money was collected. Look in verse 12. The king and Jehoiada gave the money to the construction workers, who hired masons and carpenters to restore the temple of the Lord. They also hired metal workers who made articles of iron and bronze for the Lord's temple. So here's what they did. On a cash basis, they rebuilt and repaired the place that they had come to worship in. Look at verse 13. The men in charge of the renovation worked hard and made steady progress. They restored the temple of the Lord. Yay, they did it. They restored the temple of the Lord according to its original design and strengthened it. They made it better than it was the first time. When all the repairs were finished, they brought the remaining money. Better stop right there. Look at that. Ain't that cool? They got enough money in, putting that chest out in front. They got enough money to pay for everything to be finished, and they had some money left over. So what did they do with the money left over? They bought some furniture and some fixtures, okay? It says they brought the remaining money to the king and Jehoiada. It was used, the leftover money, to make various articles for the temple of the Lord, articles for worship services and burnt offerings, including ladles and other articles made of gold and silver. And the burnt offerings were continually sacrificed in the temple of the Lord during the lifetime of Jehoiada the priest. Now, that's a cool story in the Bible. And it's often referred to as the chest of Joash, where this story takes place. Several years ago, I told this story, but in an entirely different situation for an entirely different purpose. Today, I want to take this story and accomplish several things with this story. Here are two things that I want to do today. Is everybody listening? I'm going to tell you right now, here's what I want to do with this story today. Number one, 2 years ago, Crosswater Community Church entered into a capital campaign where we went to everybody who was a member of our church and we asked them to make a 3-year financial pledge to give over and above their normal tithes and offerings. And we would use this money in this capital campaign. By the way, we called this campaign Rise Up, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. We said everything that comes in during Rise Up, we're going to use that to accomplish 3 specific goals in our church. One of the things I want to do today is to update you on what we've done with those Rise Up funds and to encourage everybody who made a commitment 2 years ago to finish this next year the commitment that you made. So the first thing I want to do is update you on where we are and encourage you to finish the commitment you made 2 years ago. Now here's the second thing I want to do. In the last 2 years, we've had a lot of new people coming to this church. Some of you are a part of that group. You were not a part of this church 2 years ago when we had a campaign called Rise Up. And we don't want to leave you out. And this is your church family. We want you to be a part of it. So today, I want to show our newest family members how you can become a part of what God is doing and is going to do in our church and to help us reach our goals. Now, before I get to the specifics of that, I want to take this story of Joash and I want to give you some timeless principles from this story. There's some lessons that we can learn about this story with Joash. Let me say this up front. When you first read this story, you think it's a story about a king taking up an offering to fix a building that needed to be repaired. And on the surface, yes, that's what this story is all about. But what's the timeless truth in this story is not money, and the timeless truth in this story is not building. What is timeless in this story is the heart of a young boy and the heart of a young man who had a heart to do God's work. Joash. So I want to talk about his heart for a minute. And And I want to talk about what kind of heart we have. So I want you to write down a couple of things that we learned from this story. Here's the first thing that I learned. I learned that a selfish heart is destructive. And I want to explain to you what I'm talking about. We live in a very self-oriented society. I don't think I have to prove that to anybody in this room. I think we all know this is a selfish culture we live in. The problem is selfishness is destructive. As a matter of fact, look here. There's some marriages in this room right now that are being destroyed because one of you or both of you are being selfish. There's some of you have relationships that are being destroyed because you're being selfish. My point is this: when we're selfish, it's destructive. Let me break that down for you. First, selfishness destroys everything that competes for self. And I'm going to say the word self a whole lot in the next 3 minutes, so y'all better pay attention or you'll get lost, okay? Here's what happens. I told you about that woman, Athaliah, a while ago. Woo, that's a bad woman. Let me show you how bad she is. Here's what happened. When Joash's family were the kings and they was in charge, Athaliah wanted to be in charge. She had some goals, selfish goals. She wanted to be the queen. So here's what she did. She got some people on her side and they killed everybody that was related to the king. They got rid of the royal line of the king. So with everybody dead, when the king was gone, she stepped up and said, I'd be glad to volunteer to be the queen. And she became the queen. So here's what she did. Here's a lesson I learned. When you got a woman named Athaliah who is all about self, this is what I want, this is what I want to see happen, and I'm going to see it happen, and nobody's going to stand in my way of getting what I want, it is destructive. She destroyed everybody in her way of becoming the queen. Here's the problem. She didn't know this. Joash was a member of the royal family. And he didn't get killed because he had an aunt that went and got him when he was a baby. She hid him in a bedroom down at the temple, and nobody knew he was there. They hired a nurse that went in and took care of him for 6 years. At the end of 6 years, everybody was sick and tired of Athaliah, so they marched this. At age 7, guess what they did? They marched little Joaz out, 7 years old, and said, look what we found in the bedroom. Here is a descendant of the king. Long live the king. So much for Athaliah and her plan. She's gone. And they make young Joash, at 7 years of age, they make him the king. Now, you okay? Because he was listening to the preacher, and the preacher gave him a heart for God. But here's a point I wanted you to learn. Selfishness destroys anything that gets in the way of self. And I'm looking at some folks in here right now. I'm telling you, you're never going to have a happy life as long as you're living for yourself. If the only thing that matters in your life is getting what you want and getting in your way and being in control and having everything go the way you want it, you're going to destroy everything around you. Selfishness destroys anything that competes for self. Here's something else I'll show you. Selfishness worships nobody but self. By the very definition of the word self, nothing is more important than self. Now, I told you this a minute ago. Don't you think for a minute that this story I just read you is about building a building or about money. Let me tell you what. Now, Joash is going to take up an offering and he's going to build a building. But here's what's about in this story. When the building got deteriorated, guess what else got deteriorated? Worship. When there was no place to worship, the people didn't worship. See, I have people tell me all the time, I don't have to go to church to worship. No, you don't. But most of you, if you don't go to church, don't worship. Unless you call fishing worshiping, or playing golf worshiping, or that kind of stuff. I don't need to go down that road. But anyway, Athaliah, what she killed was worship. That's what selfishness does. There is no such word as sacrifice to somebody who makes self number one in their life. Because, when I sacrifice, you know what I'm sacrificing? Self. If self is number one, self doesn't want to sacrifice self. Now, in case I lost you, let me make it plain, okay? Self says, I want a new car. Self says, I want a new house. Self says, I want a new wardrobe. Self says, I want one of them new gadgets. Self says, I want what I want. I want a bigger savings account. I want more investments. And so what happens is, we don't want to sacrifice what we want because self is in charge. The very idea that self might do without something is contrary to self's nature. But here's the deal you learn from Joash. Joash said, there's some things in life more important than self. God is more important to me, and the things of God are more important to me, and worshiping God is more important to me. Now, let me tell you what worship is, guys. Listen to this carefully. Worship is when I know there is something or someone in this world more important than me. So I'm willing to do without what I want for a while in order to give to something more important than me. You see that? So self doesn't want to sacrifice. Self doesn't want to worship except on its own throne. And then selfishness doesn't want to minister to anybody but self. Athaliah killed not only the worship of the Lord, but she killed ministry to others. You see, when there was a temple, people would come to the temple. If they were sick or needy or poor or struggling or hurting, they could come to the temple and somebody would minister to them. But guys, watch this. Selfishness doesn't worry about somebody else hurting. Selfishness is only worried about me. Am I comfortable? Do I have enough? Are my clothes nice enough? My car nice enough? My house nice enough? Do I have enough toys? Am I comfortable? Am I going to make it in time? I'm not worried about anybody else. That's their problem. Let me tell you what Jesus said when you just live to take care of self. Jesus said, it's recorded in Matthew 10. He says, if you cling to your life, do this. Circle the word your life, and right beside it, I want you to write the word self. If you cling to your own life, yourself, what's going to happen to you? You're going to lose it. For example, let me give an illustration. If there's a married couple in this room, all you married folks, look at me. If you as a spouse are in your marriage just to make you happy, you're never going to have a happy marriage. If you're just in that marriage clinging to self, guess what's going to happen? You're going to lose self. But look at that side. If you give your life for me, Jesus said, what'll happen? You'll find it. So when you look at your marriage, I'm not here to get, I'm here to give, you're going to find life in your marriage. Jesus said this to his disciples in Matthew 16. If any of you wants to be my follower, what do you got to do? You got to turn from your selfish ways, take up your cross, and follow me. One translation says you got to flat out deny self. So does everybody hear this first principle? If you are living to make your life comfortable and all you're interested in is self, and there's nothing more important than you taking care of self, the Bible says you're going to destroy your life and you're going to destroy others around you. Selfishness is destructive. Now look at this second thing. Not only is a selfish heart destructive, but a soft heart for God is constructive. What I love about this story is the innocence of the 7-year-old boy, Joash. At the age of 7, he becomes a king. Now, at 7, you'd think a guy's pretty self-centered. He's a kid. But he had a mentor named, that was the priest, Jehoiada, who taught him to love God. And here's what I love it. As a little kid, his heart was soft, and he learned about God. So for the next 40 years, he serves God, because he was taught to love God. So when he grows up to be an adult and understands things, he looks out there and he sees the temple in bad shape. And he says, we got to fix the temple. Let's go take an offering and fix the temple. Let me show you something about somebody that's got a soft heart. Do you have a soft heart? A soft heart obeys God with all his heart. And I can tell you this right now. You want to know if you got a soft heart for God? Here's how to find out. A soft heart says, I'll obey God with all my heart. Look what it says in verse 2. Joash did what was pleasing in the heart of the Lord. Now, everybody in this room, listen to what I'm about to say to you, okay? Listen to this. When you gave your life to Jesus, you said, he's going to be my Lord. He's going to be my master. Yesterday, we were helping my brother-in-law and sister-in-law move into their place. And my sister-in-law was out in one of those pods with the stuff. And I snuck up behind her, and I said, boo! And she screamed, oh, my Lord! And I looked at her and said, you can just call me Jack. I know I'm good, but you don't have to call me Lord or nothing. Jack's fine. And then I got to thinking about it, and I told her, I said, no, go ahead and call me Lord. Master will be fine too. And then you can just do whatever I say. That didn't go over too good. She's from Boston. But anyway, that didn't go over too good. So, but when you gave your life to Jesus, You said you're Lord. You are the boss. You are the master. So you said, I'll do whatever you say. This morning in our prayer meeting, one of our students, Connor, was in there, and we were talking, and he wasn't paying a lot of attention. So Travis volunteered him for something. Travis said, Connor will do that. And Connor looked up and said, yeah, I'll do it. And then he sat there for about 15 seconds. He said, what am I doing? And I thought when he said that, that's a perfect illustration of what we're to do with God. We come to God and say, yeah, Lord, I'll do it. What was that you wanted me to do? Because see, listen, it doesn't matter what it is. If God says it, we're going to do what's pleasing in the Lord's sight. I don't have to know. If God says it, that settles it. Because I want to do what's pleasing in the Lord's sight. That's a soft heart. Now let me tell you something. If you know God wants you to do something and you're standing around arguing with it, you got a selfish heart. You don't have a soft heart. And then a soft heart has a heart for the work of the Lord. If your heart is soft toward God, you want to do God's work. It says in verse 4, Joash decided to repair and restore the temple of the Lord. He said, I can't sit over here in my nice house and drive my nice chariot and wear these nice stuff while the temple of God is sitting over there messed up. I'll tell you, everybody listening? Look here, I'll tell you something. One of the ways you can tell if your walk with God is where it ought to be is this: if you've got a heart for reaching people and changing people's lives. Now, y'all I'm fixing to get tough, so I'm going to tell you ahead of time, okay? Is everybody ready? Just buckle your seatbelt right there, okay? Here it comes. I'm going to a casual Christian. By the way, you don't want to be one of those. All right, listen to me. A casual Christian can walk through those doors on Sunday morning, sit down here, sing a couple of songs with Nick, write down a couple of notes with me, grab a free cup of coffee, and go home with a belly full and say, ain't God good? Church was good today. But a person who has a heart for God will never be content just to come and sit in church and enjoy the good stuff and go home while people without Jesus are dying and unprepared to meet God. See, Jesus tells this story that illustrates what I'm talking about. He talks about this shepherd that had a bunch of sheep and lost one. And he said, he's not going to just sit in there with the sheep he's got while one of them's out there by himself. Listen to what it says in Matthew 18. If a man has 100 sheep and one of them wanders away, what'll he do? Say, well, we still got 99. Let's go to church and drink some coffee and eat some donuts and have a good time. No, he said, won't he leave the 99 others on the hills and go search for the one that's lost? Now, guys, everybody listen to me. Everybody look up here, okay? I want you to look up here. Let me see the white of your eyes. Listen to me. As long as there's one family on the Gulf Coast that doesn't know Jesus, as long as there's one family, on the First Coast, as long as there's one family on the First Coast that doesn't know Jesus and have Jesus living in their heart, we can't stop. We can't be satisfied until we reach them for Jesus. Every once in a while, somebody will come up to me and say, well, Jack, don't you think our church is already big enough? And this is what I tell them. Aren't you glad we didn't say that the week before you came? Let me tell you something, folks. As long as there's somebody out there in need, we can't be satisfied. Now, I know some of you are tired of hearing Tim Tebow stories, but I got to be honest with you. When I was studying for this sermon, I came across an article in Sports Illustrated about Tim Tebow that just illustrates what I'm trying to say better than anything I could do. So I want you to listen to one more, okay? Because I can't think of a better example. I'm talking about how selfishness kills you, and about how selflessness helps other people. I'm talking about how you can focus on other people and not focus on yourself. I read an article written by a guy named Rick Riley of Sports Illustrated. Now, I've read a lot of articles Rick Riley has written. He has butchered some people, torn them up, athletes, just tear them to pieces. He's a pretty tough writer. I want you to listen to the article that he wrote a couple of weeks ago about Tim Tebow. I'll read it to you, so just sit and listen for a minute. He said, I've come to believe in Tim Tebow, but not for what he does on a football field. No, I've come to believe in Tim Tebow for what he does off of a football field, which represents the best parts of us, the parts I want to be and so rarely am. Who among us is really selfless? Every week, Tim Tebow picks out someone who is suffering or who is dying or who is injured. He flies these people and their families to the Denver Broncos game. rents them a car, puts them up in a nice hotel, buys them dinner, gets them and their families pregame passes, and visits with them just before kickoff. Gets them 30-yard line tickets down low, visits with them after the game, sometimes for as long as an hour, and has them walk to his car where he sends them off with a basket of gifts. Home game or road game, win or lose, hero or goat, he does it. Remember last week when the world was pulling its hair out in the hour after Tim Tebow had stunned the Pittsburgh Steelers with an 80-yard overtime touchdown pass in the playoffs? And Twitter was exploding with 9,420 tweets per second about Tebow. When ESPN poll was naming him the most popular athlete in America, you want to know what Tim Tebow was doing while everybody else was tweeting and naming him most popular? Tebow was spending that hour talking to a 16-year-old named Bailey Knobb about the 73 surgeries she had had and what TV shows she liked to watch. Here he'd just played the game of his life, recalls Bailey's mother. And the first thing he does after his press conference is come find Bailey and ask, "Did you get anything to eat?" He acted like what he had just done wasn't anything. Everything was about Bailey. More than that, Tim Tebow kept corralling people into the room to meet Bailey. "Hey, Darius, come here. Hey, Mr. Elway, come here. Hey, Coach Fox, come here." Even though sometimes her disease is fatal, Bailey has been left with only one lung, but in spite of that, this attention took her breath away. "It was the best day of my life," she emailed. "It was a bright star among very gloomy and difficult days. Tim Tebow gave me the greatest gift I could ever imagine. He gave me the strength for the future. I now know that I can face any obstacle in front of me. Tim taught me to never give up, because at the end of the day, today might seem bleak, but it can't rain forever, and tomorrow is a new day with new promises." Riley goes on to say, "It's not just the NFL defenses that get Tebowed. It's high school girls who don't know if they'll ever get invited to a prom. It's adults who can hardly stand. It's kids who are about to die." For the game in Buffalo, it was Charlottesville, Virginia blue chip high school quarterback Jacob Rainey, who lost his leg after a freak tackle in a scrimmage. Tebow threw 3 interceptions in that Buffalo game, and the Broncos were crushed 40-14. He walked in and took a big sigh and said, "Well, that didn't go the way I planned it." Rainey remembers. Riley said, "Where I'm from, people wonder how sincere and genuine Tebow is. I think he's the most genuine person I've ever met. There's not an ounce of artifice or phoniness or Hollywood in this kid Tebow, and I've looked for it everywhere I can." Take 9-year-old Zach Taylor, a child who lives in constant pain. Immediately after Tebow shocked the Chicago Bears with a 13-10 comeback win, Tebow spent an hour with Zach and his family. At one point, Zach, who has 10 doctors, asked Tebow if he had any special prayers for hospital visits. Tebow whispered his prayer in his ear. And because Tebow still needed to be checked out by the team doctors, he took Zach in with him, but only after they had prayed the doctor prayer together. And it's not always kids. Tom Driscoll, a 55-year-old man who's dying of brain cancer at a hospice in Denver, was Tim Tebow's guest for the Cincinnati game. "The doctor took some of my brain," Driscoll said, "so my short-term memory is kind of shot. But this day I'll never forget. Tim is such a good man." This whole thing, writes Riley, makes no sense according to football. Most NFL football players will hardly talk to their teammates before a game, much less visit with the sick and dying. So Riley asked Tebow, "Isn't this a huge distraction before the game?" Tebow said, "No, it's just the opposite. It's by far the best thing I do to get myself ready to play. Here you are about to, listen to this, this is it, listen to this. Here you are about to play a game that the world says is the most important thing in the world. Win and they praise you, lose and they crush you. And here I have a chance to talk to the coolest, most courageous people in the world. It puts my life in perspective. The game really doesn't matter. I mean, I'll give 100% of my heart to win the game. But listen to this. In the end, the thing I most want to do with my life is not win championships or make a lot of money. What I want to do with my life is invest in people's life so I can make a difference. Amen and amen. That's exactly what I'm talking about. It's so easy for us to sit back and say, my life is about getting a better house and a better car and better this and better that and getting trophies and championships. When what we ought to be saying is, God's got me down here for this period of time. I want to make a difference on my way to heaven. And a heart that is soft for God is willing to sacrifice to see God's work done. He says in verse 5, he says, I want you to go out and get an offering. Come on. He saw that temple and said, let's fix it. I love it, because he's so young and enthusiastic. Have y'all ever noticed this? Listen, seriously, have y'all ever noticed this? People that are brand new Christians are so excited about Jesus. Sometimes they have to backslide a little bit before they can fit in with some of us mature Christians. We mature Christians have gotten used to everything. And these young Christians, let's go get them, man. Let's go do it. Let's go do it. That's the way young Joash was. He wanted to do it. And this is my favorite part of the story. Y'all listen now. Some of you ain't going to like this part, so I'm telling you ahead of time, okay? You ain't going to like it. He said, let's go do it. And there was some of them old codgers sitting in the back said, nah, we ain't going to do it. And they wouldn't go take the offering. Here's what I like about it. He didn't let the naysayers keep him from serving God like he knew he's supposed to. He said, y'all don't want to take the offering? You boys don't want to take the offering? No? Okay. I'll put a chest out there and tell everybody to bring it here. If you won't go get it, we'll put a chest at the door and you can drop it in. Now, that wasn't why we do it the way we do it, but it sure does fit real good for this story, doesn't it? Anyway. I mean, here they come in and they start bringing. Now, let me say something. Anytime you start doing something new for God, now y'all listening? Anytime you start doing something new for God, there's always going to be a bunch sitting around going, we don't need to do that. We shouldn't do that. It's the wrong time to do that. We should do this. We shouldn't do that. Let me tell you, Joash didn't let that kind of stuff stop him from serving God. And I just want to tell you, if you don't like what we're doing, if you don't want to serve God, if you don't want to get on the bandwagon, that's fine. Just be quiet, shut up, sit over there and let the rest of us do it. Seriously. Just don't get in the way. That's all. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Just don't get in the way of the folks that are fired up and excited and want to do it, okay? So here's what we would have done. If we'd have said, y'all go take that offering, and they didn't do it, here's what we would have done. We need to form a committee. And we're going to have a committee study why people don't want to give. Are we going to form a committee? Maybe we ought to do something. He didn't let that happen. He had a plan. So he put the chest out there. And look what happened. When he put the chest, they brought so much the chest, and they just kept emptying it. And they had a bunch of money left over. You know why? They had a heart that was soft for God. Now here's my question for everybody here today. What kind of heart do you have for God? Seriously. Now in a moment, I'm about to talk about our plans. But before I talk about our plans and before I talk about our money, any of that kind of stuff, none of that matters. Here's what matters. Do I have a heart that says, God, I'm all in. I'm all in. I'm here to serve you. What I got is yours, and I want you to serve it. Okay? Now, I mention that because, folks, we have an opportunity at this church. We have an opportunity a lot of churches will never have. A little over 2 years ago, God began a special thing in the life of this church. In the last 2 years, what has happened in this church has been exciting. There's some exciting things going on in this church. Let me just give an example of what's happened in the last 2 years. In the last 2 years, we've seen more people pray to receive Christ than we ever have in the history of this church in 2 years. In the last 2 years, we've broken every attendance record that's ever been had in the history of this church. We've gone over 1,000 people 2 times. In the past 2 years, we've baptized more people than we ever have in the history of our church. In the past 2 years, we've seen more people officially join our church and have to go through a class to do it than ever before. In the past 2 years, we have more children coming to our church than we ever have in the history of our church. We have a record number of people going to a maturity class, sitting for 4 hours learning how to mature as a believer. We have more people going through a spiritual gifts class, 301, than ever before. We have more people in small groups than we ever have before. We have more people in small groups than we ever had in Sunday school classes, just in case you don't know that. I mean, in the last 2 years, God has really been blessing this church. We've also seen God bless in the area of finances in this church. 2 years ago, there were people that didn't know if this church would survive financially. We today have more people giving consistently than have ever given in the history of our church. Our financial report for 2011 is out there. You can pick it up, but I'm going to tell you this now. Last year, our giving was up 40% over the year before. Sign God's blessing. We now have for 2012 the largest budget in the history of our church because we're doing more than we've ever done. We have the most property and buildings that we've ever had. This year, we will be more involved in mission causes than we've ever been in the history of our church. This summer, we're going to send a group to Rotan to help them get fresh water so that these people don't die of poisoned water. While we're there, we're going to teach them how to set up an Awana program for children. They've already started. We're going to go down there and equip them. We're going to help them get a church started. We have people going to South America and other countries, building buildings and helping them. Our own teenagers have been asked this summer to go and serve as leaders at a youth camp so that other youth ministers can minister and help those children. We've helped more families in crisis this last year than we ever have before. We've sponsored families in need of food, housing, clothing, and counseling more than we ever have in the life of our church. This year, we doubled our contribution to world missions this year. God is doing an incredible thing in the life of our church. We now have a brand new facility here, and we've already built this building for the future. Some of you that may visit here for the first time or you haven't been here in a long time don't understand that what you see here is nothing but a footprint for the future of what God is going to do in this church and how it's already laid out. So I want to take just a minute to just give you an update on where we are and show you the big picture so that you can see it and have an idea. In the spring of 2010, 2 years ago, we had a campaign. We asked everybody in our church at that time to give over and above their regular tithes and offerings for 3 years so that we could do 3 things. And let me tell you what those 3 things we said we wanted to do were. By the way, I put out there on the table the literature that we handed out 2 years ago that spells out the goals that we wanted to reach through Rise Up. Here's what we said first. We wanted to use these Rise Up funds to pay our monthly debt service. We don't have a lot of debt, but Nocatee gave us a bond that's significant we have to pay for. So we also have the Tolomato assessment. We didn't want to put all of that on our church when we were struggling financially, so we wanted to use our Rise Up funds to meet those obligations. We've done that for 2 years so that we could do ministry and grow. And now we're even able this year to put some of that payment into our church budget and progressively have our budget take that over. But for 2 years, we've been meeting that debt obligation with your Rise Up funds. The second goal we had in Rise Up was to go ahead and as we were given, if it looked like we were given above our debt needs, to go ahead and do some new construction. And we've been able to do that. Our Rise Up giving has been good enough that we can meet our debt and do some new things, and we haven't had to borrow a dime to do it. I just want to show you a couple of things that we've been able to do this year we wouldn't have been able to do without our Rise Up campaign. Let me show you. First of all, we kept having everybody stop here wanting to enroll their kids in Ponte Vedra High School. Every day people would pull up thinking this building was the high school because it looked so big from the outside. So we desperately needed a new sign. We were able to build a big old monument sign at the entrance of our church so at least people know who we are and where we are. We did that and paid cash for it and didn't have to spend a dime out of our budget. We also put an exterior sign up on the top of our building that can be seen all the way from Nocatee Parkway so that people could see it. We were able to do that with Rise Up funds. We've not been able to use our grass parking lot in the evenings for overflow parking because we didn't have lighting. But you'll see we've now been able to construct lighting poles and get the lights and have them installed and working so that we now have double capacity to park at our church. When we first moved here, we could only build a very small playground for our children. It was about the size of that section over here is the only playground that we had. You can actually see the only playground we had was just this little part. It came out right here, came down right here. That was it. We've now been able to go and build a fence around and have a playground that's about 8 times larger than we have so that our children can use it during the week and on Sundays. And we were able to do that without borrowing a dime. We also were able to go out and get a general contractor, Intercoastal Builders, who's here locally. And we used them to do a couple of things. We were able to build a much-needed cafe out there in our foyer that some of you use every week. We now have hot and cold running water with sinks and cabinets and counter space. And that's met our water needs and kitchen needs for the short term. I would dare say that that cafe is the most used thing in this church. I know it's used a whole lot more than our altar is. I thought I'd just throw that in for nothing. But anyway. In addition, we took our new contractor and we had him do an assessment of all the previous work that's been done here and what's left to be done. And we laid out a master plan for years and years to come to show our next steps. All of this has been done without spending any money out of our budget or without having to incur any debt. Okay? Our third goal was to reduce any debt that we had above and beyond our payments after we reached the first 2 goals. We're still working on our second goal. Now, guys, we have an opportunity to expand. I want to give you a picture of a little bit of where we are and what we're going in the future. Some of you drive up every day and you wonder what in the world we got all that concrete between these 2 buildings sticking there. Well, that's supposed to be finished one of these days. You'll see this picture here and it's actually going to be beautiful when we get around to it, okay? Now, there's that big old tower that right now all that steel and concrete's up there, but it's just holes in it. One of these days, all that's supposed to be glass. That foyer out there, where you walk from this building to that building, is all open. One day, all of that is glassed in up and down, and that serves as a gorgeous foyer and sort of like Galleria Mall out there for people to meet and greet. I thought at first it might be too big, but after seeing how y'all use this one, we may not have built it big enough. But anyway, I want to give you a couple of views of what that's like. It's going to be beautiful. There's even a reflection pond that's to be built in front of that. One day we'll be able to baptize people right out there in the open as a great testament to the Lord. And it's just going to be beautiful when you do that. Now, do you see this? There's this, it's not exactly according to this whole building is one building here, there's a building here, and there's actually a building here. There's 3 buildings right there. And you see this building right there? See that building? It isn't there. One of these days, that building's going to be there. One of these days, that's going to be our future worship center. Let me give you a picture of what I'm talking about. This is our building that's seen from a satellite. We're sitting right here in this building right now. That's our children building. Now, let me just show you something. Here's that tower and that foyer that one day is going to be built. The permanent restrooms are already there. One of these days, the big worship center is going to be all back here. One of these days, your new pastor is going to build that building back there. And I'm going to sit back there with Stooney and drink coffee and listen to him preach, okay? But what some of you don't realize is in this building where we are right now, there's a whole nother building right there. You see that wall right there? All up there, there's a second floor that's already built, just didn't build inside. Back there along that wall, all the way back above that foyer, there's another building right there that runs along. Second floor already built up there, just the inside's not finished out. If you go over here to this building, that whole children's building, that second floor is already built. The outside walls, the roof is there, just the interior hadn't been built out. On top of our office building and education building, these are actually 2 separate little buildings here. Both floors upstairs already built, but isn't finished out on the inside. Here's the problem. We don't have any access to get up there. You can't get up there legally. Thought I'd just mention that. You can't get up there. So we've got to have the ability to rise up to the second floor. See where that name came from? Y'all figured that out? Boy, y'all a sharp group, I'm telling you. See, we not only need to rise up or step up spiritually, we've literally got to rise up to that floor. There is more space right there over that children building than there is down below for children. And then we have these two buildings to go along with it. So the first thing we got to do is get access up there, which means we got to have stairs and we got to have an elevator. We can't just build the stairs because the law says if you have stairs going up, you have to have an elevator for the handicap. So if you build stairs, you got to have the elevator. So, well, why don't we just build the elevator? Well, the law says if you have an elevator, you got to have stairs in case there's a fire. You got to be able to go down the stairs. So you can't build one without the other. You got to build both. Now, sitting right there already is the shaft for the elevator. Right there is already the outside walls to hold the stairs. But we got to get steel, we got to get the elevator, we got to construct it, we got to build it. Here's a layout of our property. Right there is where we need to build the stairs. Right there is where we need to build the elevator so we get up top. Now, just want to give you an idea of what will happen one day when we get up top. I want you to look at the second floor layout of upstairs. When you get off, you'll come on a landing area that you can actually see right now. Then you will step in right here to a beautiful welcome children's registration area. I want to give you an idea of what that's going to look like one of these days. When you walk through the door, you'll walk in, there'll be children's workers here to greet moms, dads, and families, register your children, take care of their safety needs. It's so tall that we can actually build a little third level on that floor. If you're standing up there looking back toward us, this is what it'll look like. You come in that door down there, there's a fellowship area and a greeting area for all of our families. All along that building are classrooms. All along this building are classrooms. You go back to that floor plan and I'll show you what I'm talking about. Here's rooms for, puddles and cuddles and all them things in Awana. All those children, they're classrooms for children all along right there. Here is a gigantic playroom comparable or bigger than what we now have downstairs for our children to play in. Right there is a children's theater so that we can do multimedia presentations with children that can keep their attention. They're not like y'all that can pay attention for this 3-hour sermon. Okay? So we got to keep their attention. Right here is a gigantic youth room. We had 50 teenagers here Wednesday night. We need a big old youth room. I'll give you an idea what that's going to look like one of these days. A gigantic youth room with a stage and room to seat well over 100 with their own sound and ideas. Just an idea of what that can be. And then back on that floor plan, wrapped around that, there is a kitchen right there so that the children and the youth and all of their activities can be serviced and taken care of. There's restroom facilities, there's meeting areas. All of that is waiting on the second floor. But guess what? We can't do anything until we what? Have access. So to have access, we got to rise up and build that elevator and to build the stairs. Now, they don't give that stuff away. And they don't do that work for nothing. It's going to cost $217,000 to build those stairs and to build that elevator to get up there. We've made a commitment not to build anything unless we can pay cash for it and to build as we go. So we're asking God to do something in our church so that we can raise the money to at least do phase 1. This entire project is laid out in phases so we don't have to do any of it at one time. We did phase 1, which was over here, our cafe. Phase 2 is our project, and then there are 3, 4, 5, there are all kind of phases here as we go along. We want to do phase 2 as quickly as we can. And we can do it as quickly as we can as soon as we get $218,000. Now, how are we going to do that? 2 years ago, we asked everybody in this church to make a commitment to give over and above their tithes for the next 2 years. Some of you have been doing that faithfully and consistently. Today, when you pick up your financial statement that we're required by law to give you for your taxes, you can look on there and see what you committed 2 years ago, and you can see what you've already given. You got 1 year left, and we want to encourage you today. finish strong. Some of us that came into our church, we weren't here 2 years ago. We want to ask you to join us and help us rise up to that floor. This is your church. Inside your bulletin this morning, you got a commitment card. It looks just like this. I want you to focus in and look on the part that you've got to fill out. We're going to ask you in the next 2 weeks to prayerfully consider this and to fill it out. We won't save money, so we use the cards we had 2 years ago, okay? So we went up here and marked out 156 weeks, and we wrote in 52 weeks. We marked out 36 months, we put in 12 months, and we marked out 3 years and put in 1 year. Those of you who made a commitment 2 years ago, we want to challenge you to say, can you finish your commitment this year? And we want you to put right down here, this is how much I believe I'll be able to give and rise up in this year, 2012. To finish my pledge and commitment, okay? And you can put down you want to give it over 52 weeks, over 12 weeks, or if you want to give it one time. But those of you who've already made that commitment, we just encourage you, finish. And people like me, I made a commitment 2 years ago. I've not finished it. I'm right on time, but I got another 12 months I need to finish. So I'm going to fill that out and put my next 12 months right there. For those of you who are new in our church, here's what we want to ask you to do. Would you ask God, and remember the message this morning of Joash, and say, there are some things in my life that I can put off for a while. Because there's something more important than me being comfortable or me having to do this or do that. The next 12 months, I want to sacrifice so that we have access up there to that floor. So maybe you want to give every week for 52 weeks above your regular gifts, or every month for 12 months, or a one-time gift for 1 year, and then total it up and put it here. Now, this is not your regular giving. The Bible says we're to give our regular tithes for the work of the Lord. And we're asking you while we're doing this to go ahead and make a commitment. What are you going to do with your regular tithes and offerings during this year, and just put it right there and make your commitment for the new year, okay? So what we're asking you to do is not next Sunday, but the next Sunday. We'd like for you to bring this card filled out. We'll have an opportunity for you to put it in something. I don't know, a bucket, a chest, a basket, whatever. We're going to give you an opportunity to put it in there. At the same time, we're going to ask you on that Sunday to give as much of it as you can that day. We want to try to have a large rise-up offering on that one day so we can maybe at least, see when we can get started to get to building that. Only takes 10 weeks to build those stairs and elevators. Takes a while to do the planning and get all that done, but once they actually start hammering the nails, it only takes 10 weeks. But what's going to be the key is, if we're ready to rise up, step up to the challenge and say, God, I want to be a part of making that happen. And this is, let me tell you, I don't have time to do it. Let me just tell you. There's a church in Mobile, Alabama. I sacrificed a lot of things personally, financially, so that building could be built. And when we built it, the first kid that was baptized in that church was my child. And every time I drive back to Mobile, Alabama, or fly through there, and I look and I see that building. And to this day, people are still coming to know Jesus and are being ministered to. It was well worth the sacrifice. And one of these days, we're going to be gone and up in glory with Jesus. We want to know we left a place here where people can come to know Jesus. Children and teenagers long after we're gone. Now, there's a lot of things we could build, a lot of things we could do, but I don't know of anything more important to invest in than children and teenagers. And we have an opportunity to create that, and we've set that as our next priority. So I want to challenge you to be a part of that and let God use you. And say, God, I know there's something important, and I want to be a part of it. Together, we can see God do more than we have ever imagined him do it. I want you to just close your eyes for a minute and bow your heads. I didn't just say this to be politically correct. This message and this service today is not about money. This message and this service today is not about building a building. It is about our hearts being totally committed to God. You can't give money. You can't build a building. You can't do any of those things to make peace with God. Jesus made peace for you on the cross. And you can right now ask Jesus to come into your heart, and he'll do it. If you just simply say, Jesus, I need you in my life. I don't want to be selfish. I want my life to be run and controlled by you. If you'll make that fresh commitment, ask him to come into your heart today, he'll do it. You can do it right now where you sit. And then for all of us, I want to encourage you to pray this prayer right where you're sitting. God, what do you want me to do with my life? How do you want me to serve you? And to get specific, God, what do you want to do through me to help Crosswater rise up? What can I give? What can I do to help make it possible to get that stairs and elevator up there so that we can go to the next phase and move forward? And then just listen to God. I don't want you to do anything God doesn't tell you to do, but I want you to do what he tells you to do. God, thank you for letting us be a part of this. Oh, what a privilege it is to pastor this church and these wonderful people and to see what you're doing and sitting right in these rooms are lives that would not have been changed if you had to put this church here. And it's awesome to see it. There are people still that we need to reach, and help us never to stop reaching them. And we have our next project here to do, and I pray you'd put it on our hearts. God, you have more than enough, and you want to use us to do it. So I pray you just put it on our hearts, and we'll just obey you. We pray this, and we ask it in Jesus' name. Amen. Thank you so much for being here today. As you leave, don't forget to put your tithes and offerings in. There's plenty of cupcakes and stuff left from Stooney's party, so grab one and ruin your dinner, okay?